What is the biggest "this relationship won't last" red flag you've ever seen at a wedding? Story 1. The pastor at the wedding, in front of a couple hundred people, said, "Can you believe that just 2 months ago, bride's name, was in my house, crying because she was so lonely and wanted to be married so badly? And now look at her 2 months later, getting married to a guy she met the next day." Even her elderly grandmother laughed out loud. Story 2. Attended a wedding where the bride talked, not about her love for him or how great he is, but more about how he changed so much of his personality for her, and how that made everything perfect. Story 3. The groom had the ring in his pocket but forgot which one, and the bride, visually annoyed, said, "That's the kind of guy I'm marrying." They divorced within the year. Story 4. I worked as a county prosecutor. I did a sentencing where the guy was sent to prison for about 2 years. As I was walking out of the courtroom, his girlfriend asked the judge to marry her to her boyfriend, who was going to prison. Judge said she needed a marriage license, and there was a 2-day waiting period. He was basically telling her not to marry the guy. She pulls out the marriage license. The judge then says, "You need 2 witnesses." She was alone. The dude's attorney grabbed me by the arm and enthusiastically volunteered us to be the witnesses. The wedding went through, and now I have a story for Reddit. A side note, the guy was in an orange jumpsuit and was shackled, literally shackled, during the ceremony. TLDR. I sentenced man to prison, then served as best man in his wedding. Edit. Thank you for the gold. Further edit. As the prosecutor, I did not hand down the sentence. I handled the sentence for the state of Kansas. I was trying to keep the story short. Story 5. I was a bridesmaid in a wedding, and right after the ceremony, the bride told me this wasn't actually a wedding because the groom couldn't get married as he was still married to someone else. She was 3 months pregnant and was throwing a fake wedding to please her religious family and collect money gifts. So that was cool. They divorced within a year. Story 6. At the end of the ceremony, she changed into an extremely fancy going-away outfit, tight and purple and laced up down the sides. He changed into an old t-shirt and shorts that reeked of stale student bachelor sweat and said, "Oh, I didn't know we were dressing up." She gave him a look of the purest hatred and disgust. They separated 6 months later. Story 7. The groom forgot the bride's name during his toast to her and called her a similar but very different name. Like if her name was Brenda, he called her Brittany. It lasted 2 years. Oddly, the wedding where the bride started labor during the reception is going strong 10 years later. It was absolutely a shotgun wedding. Her father pretty much told him either man up and marry her or get out of her life so she could find the kid a real father. The groom was at the time a stoner who most of our family disliked. I always kind of liked him, but I wouldn't have wanted to be having a baby with him. I was certain she would be a married single mom. And somehow between her 3rd trimester and the birth, he straightened up. He worked for a few years, got injured and became a stay-at-home dad while she worked. This is not a dig at him in the least. He's a great dad, and seems to be a great husband. Their home is always clean enough to be healthy, cluttered enough to be comfortable, and he cooks dinner 6 nights a week so his wife can come home and relax after work. Plus, while he was working, she was going to school for her special education certification, and he never once tried to discourage her, or imply that it was a stupid job to want the way her mother did. But yeah, when your water breaks during the father-daughter dance, things will be said. Story 8. During the vows, the bride laughed at the "for richer or poorer" part and wouldn't say it. Somehow they're still going strong. I sure hope he never loses his job. Story 9. Groom was sending texts to a very uninterested bridesmaid all night. Groom was also more interested in getting wasted with his buddies than being with the bride. There were also red flags before the wedding. No surprise they were divorced in less than a year. Story 10. Years ago, I attended a wedding and reception of a friend and neighbor. At the reception, the bride started crying. Not happy tears either. Long, heartfelt sobs. 10 months later, she had a baby, and the next month he beat her up so bad she passed out on the front lawn. Her ex, who was a big guy and father of her first 2 children, came over their house and dragged the new husband out by his hair and beat his on the front lawn. New hubby left town and she divorced him right after that. Then we found out his first wife divorced him for beating her up too. Story 11. After the ceremony, the bride, who had epilepsy, had a seizure and her family took her into a side room away from all the guests to look after her until she'd recovered. The groom didn't bother to go and help look after his wife. He was too busy getting drunk and partying with all his mates. Even after the bride recovered enough to return to the celebrations, he didn't stay with her or comfort her, and she sat there in tears for half the night. It lasted a couple of years before they divorced due to his selfishness and alcohol problem. Story 12. The groom wouldn't stop talking about the marriage like it was a prison sentence. He incessantly went on about how it was the end of his freedom and how he was going to be tied down to the ball and chain now. They were divorced in just under a year. Story 13. In my friend's vows, he was talking about her eyes, which were blue, and he called them green. Also, they got married on the girl's 18th birthday because her parents wouldn't let them get married earlier. Story 14. The bride was 32, 48 years old. She was a compulsive liar. Said she had 4 kids, but that her ex killed them and got away with it. Married the groom within 3 months of meeting. He was 21 and a virgin. She drove a wedge between him and his extremely close family. She made him quit his waiter job because he wasn't allowed to talk to women. They got married in a Waffle House parking lot. Last I heard, they were still together. He can no longer have friends, so I can't talk to him. I'm a woman, so he's double banned. Story 15. The groom was madly in love with his fiancée, as one would hope. Always got the vibe she just wasn't that. Into it. During the wedding, he was so nervous he stuttered. Bride rolled her eyes and looked pissed. Then later in the night after dinner and music had started, the bride got annoyed people weren't staying in their allocate seats. They had a wishing well for presents. We added our anonymous gift with a card and thought that was that. 1 week later, get an abusive call that we did not put in. This ended up getting so bad it tore down multiple friendships for the groom. Bride wanted enough money to buy a house. Turns out bride was cheating on him the whole time, with someone who was also married. Edit. Whoa, this blew up. He ended up leaving her about 2 years later when a teenager, family friend, told him about the cheating. She then was threatening to take half his business if he didn't pay her rent for the following 3 or 6 months. All types of class. Story 16. My cousin's wedding. He was in the army, his bride was 6 months pregnant, a senior in high school, and she had just turned 18 the previous day. Her grandfather was the officiant, and he gave a big speech about how marriage was only between one man and one woman, and no one can tear apart what God puts together. They opened their gifts in front of everyone like it was a birthday party. There was no alcohol, dancing, or food. Within 40 minutes after the gift opening, the happy couple peeled out of the Boy Scout lodge, doing donuts while her teenage friends cheered them on. They spent the night at the hotel everyone was staying at, separately, which consisted of him getting shit-faced with his friends while she was alone in their room. In front of our entire family, my sister said, "I give them a year." She was wrong, though. Within 3 months of the kid coming, they had split, and my cousin swears the kid isn't his. The whole wedding was one giant fucking red flag. Story 17. I saw the newly married couple step out of an elevator, and he accidentally stepped on her dress. She snapped and turned around, yelling, "Do that again and see what happens!" He was stone-faced and without saying anything, immediately went to the bar for a beer. Story 18. I wasn't actually there, but a girl I went to school with posted video of her ceremony on FB. Groom was so drunk the best man had to hold him upright. Lots of swaying and random incoherent babbling. Bride didn't seem particularly fazed by it and had a sort of, just ignore him and let's get on with it kind of attitude. There was also an album of photos, and the groom was flipping off the camera in literally every pic he was in. I was honestly shocked that the officiant went through with the ceremony, and doubly shocked she put it out there for everyone to see. Cue a few months worth of, "I can't believe he's drunk all the time," follow-up posts, divorced less than a year later. Story 19. Bride told me and my partner a few weeks earlier that she didn't want to go through with it. She had generic vows, husbands were beautiful. She had a sour face the whole time. It was almost funny. It ended up turning out that she was shagging my partner the last year, and she left her husband for him 4 months in. I dodged a bullet. Story 20. Went to a wedding for one of my older, male cousins who has 2 sisters about my age. Apparently the bride talked to the oldest sister, whom the groom was very close to, and said something like, "Just so you know, you're not the most important girl in his life anymore. I am. Can't wait to see how this one plays out." Story 21. Attended a very big, very religious wedding of a 21-year-old bride and a 22-year-old groom. They lied about where they met. It was on Tinder. During a round of truth or dare with the groom and his members of the wedding party the night before, he admitted his biggest love language is touch, but that his SO hated to express affection physically. All he wanted was to be cuddled sometimes, and she'd refuse. He said he hoped it got better after they were married. All the groomsmen made frantic eye contact and changed the subject. They're still married, as of a year later, but PSA, guys, nothing gets better after you get married. That's still your partner. That's still your relationship. Edit. Religion is almost certainly not the determining factor for her preferences. And I know relationships where there is compromise can still work, but marriage does not inherently fix an aspect of your partner you are unhappy with, that's all. Story 22. Older guy marrying a young Eastern European. The groom's friend said at the reception, "This party is great. I hope I get invited to the one next year." The guy had been married a few times before. Story 23. The bride and groom got in an argument post-reception, and the bride asterisk ran away asterisk. It was in a small town in the middle of nowhere, but we ran around all night trying to find her LOL. What an adventure. Edit. Since so many are asking, yes, we found her after a couple hours LMAO. She was near the hotel just chilling outside, acting like nothing happened. Story 24. The groom spent almost the entire wedding glued to his female work colleague, to the point that the bride had to drag him away for their first dance. They also kept going off somewhere together. A friend tried to follow them outside, but it was too dark to locate them. You could see the obvious hurt on the bride's face throughout the day. Prior to the wedding, he'd taken his colleague away abroad for his stag do, just the two of them, despite the bride's protests. And in his wedding speech, he pointed his colleague out and told her that he'd had the best time of his life that weekend. They're still together at the moment, but I don't see it being the happy ending that the bride was so desperate for. Story 25. Processional music was Options by Pedro the Lion. I could never divorce you without a good reason. And though I may never have to, it's good to have options. But for now, I need you. But for now, I want you. But for now, I'll hold you. That marriage lasted a year and a half. Story 26. The groom refused to get dressed and wore a black t-shirt and sneakers. The bride looked incredible in her gown, and he looked like he was popping to the shops for a pack of ciggies. Story 27. Groom was clearly having a good time. Bride was visibly uncomfortable. When it came time for vows, the groom had a long list and read it off nicely. The bride said something along the lines of, "I'm just gonna wing it, basically you're my best friend," and trailed off soon after. Thank God for the open bar. Story 28. Not at a wedding, but I knew a guy who had been having problems with his girlfriend for a while. So the best solution he could come up with? Proposing. Just FYI, proposing/marrying someone isn't going to magically fix the problems. Edit. I guess to add my own story, getting married in a library just because you're pregnant and need good health insurance spells disaster. So a year and a half later, I'm single and much happier that way. Story 29. I'm the keyboard player for a wedding band, so I've seen all sorts of ridiculous at weddings that would qualify as a red flag. That said, one stands above the rest. The groom aggressively grinding on two of the bridesmaids, simultaneously, one of which was the bride's sister. Story 30. At the reception, there's a local tradition for the groomsmen to steal the bride. Basically, they do a quick bar hop and come back to continue the reception. My husband was a groomsman, and as more than an hour passed, I finally called him. He said she was having a blast and wouldn't leave. The groom had arrived back after about 30 minutes, laughed it off at first, then relief when she finally blew back in totally smashed. They made it about 2 months after that. Story 31. I've posted about this before. It was my wedding. The groom stopped the entire ceremony, which was held at our place, so he could watch The Simpsons. There was no discussion about this beforehand. He just did it. No, we are not still married. Shocking, I know. Story 32. The father of the bride made a speech about how he saw his daughter organizing the groom over time. Basically, instead of telling a story of their burgeoning love, it was a tale of how she began to control him over time. Was cringy. Lasted 3 years. Story 33. Best friend's wedding. 15 minutes into the reception, the wife is at the main dinner table screaming at her mom, who is across the room, calling her a crack. She's a gem. Story 34. At my own wedding, when my wife threw the bride bouquet over her shoulder towards all the single ladies, one of them took a few steps back to take a run-up and used the shoulders of some other girls to jump like a quarterback, making the final game-deciding touchdown. She literally flew over the other girls, but another girl got the bouquet before she could reach it, which didn't stop her. She forcibly snatched the flowers out of the other girl's hands while in midair. The flowers were ripped apart at that point, and a lot of the girls were falling and stumbling to the ground. She emerged out of this pile of single ladies with a couple of destroyed flowers in her hand, her hair and cloth all over the place, and made a lout-winning shout-out while looking around to find her boyfriend, which had quietly sneaked away while she was going berserk for the bouquet. It was hilarious and depressing at the same time. Her boyfriend ended the relationship shortly after the wedding. Story 35. There was a part of the ceremony where the bride and groom were kneeling at the altar. On the bottom of the groom's shoes were 2 pieces of tape that read, "Help" and "Me" on them. Never was clear whether he put them there or was pranked by his groomsmen, but it felt like an omen. They lasted less than a year. Story 36. Technically, the day before the wedding, my Milteby gave me some of her nice jewelry, but added that she wanted some of it back **** when **** we got divorced. Not if. A year and a half later, as we got divorced, I sent all of it back to her, which apparently surprised her. PTSA. I wish people realized how hard it is to make a marriage work through all the normal pitfalls when family members are not supportive or even downright unsupportive. Story 37. The best man, the groom's lifelong best friend, was gay. And I mean gay. All but one of the groomsmen were gay. A few years after the wedding, the groom's father died. Within a week of the funeral, he told her it wasn't working and moved in with the best man. Everyone did their best to act shocked. Edit. This is blown up enough that I should elaborate. The bride worked with a couple of my friends, and then for them when they started their own business. I knew her for years before the marriage, from before she met the groom. We never dated or considered dating, but we were part of each other's core social groups. We talked a lot. The bride and groom met in college. They dated casually. He would always take her to family functions back home, but when they were back at school, he would distance himself. From the first time I met him, I knew he was gay. This was before I met or even heard about the best friend. He didn't react at all to her or to other women. His eyes just didn't go where the eyes of a guy who's interested in women go. He was fit and well-groomed, and I saw more than one female flirting attempt crash and burn. All her friends tried to warn her. We literally took turns. My girlfriend at the time worked with a sweet little guy who performed in drag shows. We invited the bride and groom to go with us to a show and support him. The big, loud downtown gay dance club had a straight night that was a hoot, and a bunch of us used to go on a regular basis. He flatly refused to go to a gay bar. It's just sad that he wasted so much time to keep from disappointing his father, and that she wasted so much time participating in his lie. I don't and obviously can't know how happy they were together. I hope it was bliss, but I doubt it. Story 38. The bride-to-be of my friend would not let him participate in the entire bachelor party. It wasn't even a risque itinerary, more of just a guy's night with drinking and poker and such, so we essentially had his stag without him. Story 39. I come from a very large Indian family, portions of which still strongly believe in traditional marriage. Red, child brides, forced marriage, uncle, niece marriages. There was one where the groom was clearly an abuser, but she was still forced to marry him. To no one's surprise, the marriage ended in a horrible, long, drawn-out divorce. Her parents still haven't forgiven her for divorcing him. In another case, a woman in the family eventually found the guy of her dreams and wanted to marry him. Love marriage, and he's a good guy. However, as her older brother was unmarried, she was not allowed to marry until he did first. So their parents forced him to marry an emotionally manipulative girl, which he clearly understood she was asterisk prior to getting married asterisk. He went through with it anyway on the pretext that he was okay sacrificing his life for the sake of his sister. Within 2 years, they were divorced. He eventually married again for love, but got divorced. He's now preparing to marry for the third time, again at the behest of his family because it's not okay for the older brother to be single while the younger sister is married. Story 40. It was a small, intimate wedding, and the couple just played music on a stereo instead of hiring a DJ utilizing a sound system. He had made a mixtape CD and wanted to play it at the reception. She patted his arm and said, "Oh, sweetie, no one but you wants to hear that." They were divorced within a year of the wedding. Story 41. The bride was pregnant. The groom might or might not have been the father. She also invited her lover to the wedding and got really pissed off with me because her lover was flirting with me. She had also slept with her sister's fiancé 2 months before the wedding. At the bachelorette party, she was also snorting copious amounts of cocaine. After her child was born, she got divorced and hubby got custody. She went back to live with her parents because she kept getting fired and couldn't support herself. Biggest train wreck I've ever seen personally. Story 42. Dude I used to know called off the wedding with less than 24 HRS to go. His bride had gone out for her bachelorette party and came back to their place shit-faced. While walking through their bedroom under the blacklights they had, he saw a big glowing white stain in the crotch of her pants running halfway down one thigh. Cue their last fight, where she eventually admitted to banging multiple guys during the party and bringing their gravy train on home to the love of her life. It was all over, but the crying. Story 43. My brother-in-law vowed to get fat with my sister while reciting his vows. Considering my sister is already kinda overweight, I found that a rather strange thing to say. Story 44. One bride S was a huge hip-hop fan. Before she got married, her whole life was hip-hop, be it music, dance, or street style. Her, now ex-wife A, liked country, so they had an entirely country-themed wedding. Like in a barn with boots and burlap and camo. There was nothing of S in their wedding, not even her family who didn't approve of A. Story 45. The bride didn't look happy to be walking down the aisle. She was smiling, but it was very much a pasted-on smile that I assumed was because she was nervous. Found out at the wedding that her parents had offered to pay for the big wedding or pay for a small wedding, then give them the money for a down payment for a house. She wanted the wedding. Where we live, the housing market is insanely competitive, and this was at the peak of the housing prices right before the crash. Her parents basically offered her the ability to jumpstart their lives together. She turned it down for the big party with her as the center of attention. It was over within 2 years. She didn't even seem upset about it. Story 46. At my brother's first wedding, his fiance's dad came into the room we were using to get ready and told my brother that if he wanted to leave, that he would take care of all the people inside and he wouldn't even be mad. My brother did it anyway. Divorced 4 months later. Story 47. I wasn't at a family member's wedding, but looking at the pictures and video, I pissed my mom off by saying I give it 2 years, tops. There were easily twice as many pics of the groom with his mother as there were of the bride and groom. And the pics were odd. Mom was hanging all over the groom so much and was so handsy/touchy it looked like they were a couple. They were separated about a year and a half later. The bride and groom. As far as I know, the groom and his mom are still together. Story 48. It was at the rehearsal dinner the night before. Bride was drunk and crying in the car because he had some other girl's phone number in his wallet. Still got Morrow, divorced within a year. Story 49. We actually had a false red flag situation a couple years back. The groom had been acting way too flirty with the maid of honor all night, and even disappeared with her for a while. Turns out it was a Dr. Marston and the Wonder Woman situation, which my then GF found out when she found the bride, as she described it, 6 inches of silicone deep into the maid of honor. The 3 of them are still living together. It seems to be working for them so far. Story 50. It was a dual wedding. That's right, folks. 2 sets of my friends got married at the same time. I thought it was fucking stupid and neither marriage would last 2 years. I was right. Story 51. Was a few nights before the wedding, but I know a guy whose wife was so paranoid she wouldn't allow him to attend his bachelor party. Then none of the guys who organized it were allowed to attend the wedding. Story 52. My friend got married to his baby mama after their kid was a few years old. At their wedding, it was a good reception and the bride was a great wing woman, so a bridesmaid and I left to have a party of our own. Not great, and that's a different story. We came back and joined the after party and everybody was feeling pretty good. Well, soon enough, the bride was sitting at the bar by me and starts making comments and getting pretty grabby. I try to get away. It's awkward. So I wave my buddy the groom over and tell him what's up and he should probably get her out of there. She tells him she just wanted to feel but I wouldn't let her. They proceed to get in a fight. Years later, they're still together. No way she's been faithful, but not my problem. He refuses to see it. Wish him the best of luck. Story 53. The wedding is happening tomorrow. They have known Eakother for 4 months. He speaks almost zero English and is in the country illegally. She is pregnant with his baby. This is her 3rd time literally in this exact situation. I'm going for the drama, mostly. Update. What a shit show that was. I feel bad spilling the juice on this, but here is what happened. So her parents didn't come. Her mom allegedly told her she's a fool, and I guess they're done with this. All the guests, including myself, seemed like random invites to fill seats. She put the wedding together herself, and it was falling apart everywhere. The limo driver hadn't been paid, I guess. The room for the party afterwards wasn't ready, and she invited more people than the host could allow, and people were being turned away, encouraged to leave early. The groom read a speech written by the bride in very, very broken and incoherent English. We didn't know what he was saying. He didn't know what he was saying. She was visibly annoyed with everyone, and with the groom nearly the whole time. The lady officiating the wedding seemed the most stable one there and deserves an award for keeping her together. Story 54. This is completely different, but a few friends thought it was a red flag. My wife stopped me before our wedding and made me take off my socks and shoes and my suit jacket. She then rolled up my sleeves and my pants and unbuttoned my shirt and said something like, "I'm marrying a hippie lumberjack, not a businessman." She was a little tipsy, as was I. It wasn't a very traditional wedding. She is amazing and I love her. You could just picture Nana's face as I walked down the aisle with a wide open shirt. I think she took it better than her grandparents, though. Story 55. Older couple 50 as bride never married. Groom divorced with 3 kids. I was their wedding photographer. The bride's grandma told, "Oh gosh," bride's mom went all out on this wedding. "You know we never thought bride would marry." Then rolled her eyes. Bride never smiled the whole day. The groom was completely drunk. After she got drunk, they made out and it was horrid. Before I could finish their photos, I found out the bride had been having an affair with a guy in the prison she worked at. Story 56. I met my friend's to-be wife at the wedding. Never even heard of her before that day. She did several weird, "I'm getting a bad vibe" things, but the only one I really remember was her constantly facing the emblems on the champagne glasses in the same direction for the photographer, instead of enjoying her time or paying attention to anything else at the reception. They divorced 6 months later. Story 57. I have redneck cousins. I went to one of their weddings. Jello shots at the altar, and the groom was wearing a flannel, which he tore off to jump in my grandparents' pool. Bride was wearing her classiest tank top and had a king cobra in her hands for half the after party. My cousin, the bride, told me that she only said yes because she couldn't see herself getting anyone better. About a year later, and they're still married. If they're happy, so I won't judge. Story 58. Wasn't at the wedding, but the bachelorette party beach weekend. She fully acknowledged that she had confessed to cheating on her fiancé. He would be so hurt if he found out she cheated again, and she would absolutely never do anything to hurt him like that a second time, etc. Proceeded to disappear into a random car to drunkenly make out with a random drunk dude. I know there's a whole thing about bachelorette parties and infidelity, but to call attention to how it'd be extremely effed up to do that again, and then proceed to do the thing she swore she would never do. Again, that seems extra special. Story 59. Groom hated the bride's family. Groom's family didn't approve of the bride. Very awkward at a wedding. Bride makes her promises, something along the lines of, "I promise to try and be worthy of your family," etc. And we all raise eyebrows at each other. Groom's speech is all about how much he has helped his bride change for the better. and how he made her what she is. Eyebrows are practically falling off the top of my head at this point. It's been a few months, so I guess we will wait and see. I just thought it was very controlling. Story 60. I brought my girlfriend to a buddy's wedding, and a conversation about kids came up. She told me she wouldn't want kids for at least another 10 years. We were only about 6 months in at that point, but things seemed pretty serious. I was sure I did want kids with her, and I told her I'd be totally supportive of her if she ever became pregnant, whatever her decision was. A few hours and a handful of drinks later, she told me she'd gotten an abortion recently, during our relationship. Didn't know if it was mine or not. Kind of a red flag. Story 61. I was 15 years old, bridesmaid to my 16-year-old good friend, who was 6 months pregnant, about to get married to the 28-year-old father. Her mother paid for a wedding of 100 people, in a historic church. Really fancy. Anyways, when bets were already being made as to how long the wedding would last at the reception, I realized I wasn't the only one with misgivings of the wedding. Most were betting on less than a year. Needless to say, no big payout was done. Story 62. Bride and groom secretly marry, tell no one, because their relationship would cost him his job. They have a wedding 1 year later, about a month after she graduated. College, not high school. While at the reception, we were playing a counting game, which consisted of how many groomsmen has the bride slept with, which was all 8 of them. The groom had slept with 3 of the bridesmaids, so there was that too. Then we started the betting pool at the reception, which only played country music and served grits 3 ways with beer. I won the bet, though, lasted 6 months after the ceremony. Which isn't too surprising when the bride went home with the guitarist from the band playing at the reception instead of with the groom. Story 63. I was a groomsman. The groom was nowhere to be found as the night was winding up. The intoxicated bride, whom I'd met maybe 3 times prior, asked me to dance. Then she said to me, "When I masturbate, I think of you." That was the first time she ever expressed interest in me. They had 3 kids in 5 years. Both caught each other cheating on the other. Divorced at the 5-year mark. Story 64. I'm at a poker table, Las Vegas, Labor Day weekend. It's late Saturday night. Next to me, lady, mid-20s, naturally pretty country girl. She's a decent poker player, having a good time. Had a second rum and coke, is done with alcohol, and is now drinking Diet Red Bulls. Next to her dude, mid-20s, in good shape, rough around the edges. He's a decent poker player, but he's drinking nothing but Jack and rocks, and he's getting loud. For reasons I no longer remember, I assume he works in construction. It's about 11 p.m. now, and these two have been married about 4 hours at this point. She has a bad hand, doesn't matter. She's gone from pretty good to breaking even for the night. He's dropped about $3,400 now, and I noticed that a couple of players are keying in on him now. 12 a.m. He's getting louder, gets warned for swearing at the table. Everybody at the table is hoping to get a piece of his money when he starts going crazy. 1 a.m. He's down $1,000 now. They are going to play all night. Their plane leaves in 10 hours, and they have no room at any hotel. 2 a.m. She's up $100 and is rock solid. She's gone from chatty to super quiet. Hubby is all over the place and is dropping about $200 an hour to the table at this point. 3 a.m. I leave the table. I can't help wondering what possesses a solid 8+ of a woman to marry this pathetic, drunken mess of a boy. I can't imagine a world where he didn't do something bad that night that she had to clean up. And looking back, I can't imagine a world where he doesn't do something bad that she has to clean up every few days. Story 65. A very, at the time, Christian bride told me that their relationship was toxic, but they wanted to have. They were saving themselves for marriage. Flash forward several years. I'm friends with the groom. They'd gotten divorced. He was now married to another woman who was devoutly Christian. He no longer believed. He told me that she basically just put up with his disbelief, prayed for him all the time, and she wanted to have kids and he didn't. They're also now divorced. Story 66. Went to a wedding of my wife's coworker. She was the sweetest person, and her fiancé was a total slob. Just a cocky, out-of-shape, burnt-out frat guy. Had told her to her face about all the girls he'd slept with, and how he'd had perfect weeks where he'd slept with a different girl every night. Pretty sure this was a bad technique to try and make her stick around and think he was desirable. Then, at the wedding drink so much, remember really big guy, he passed out before anyone has left and she has to take him to their hotel room passed out and doesn't get to finish her own wedding or have a wedding night. I feel so sad for her. Story 67. I've seen it a couple of times. 1. The groom gives this speech during the reception about the wife being subservient to the husband and how it says this in the Bible. The bride sort of jokes about how he's dreaming, and he very seriously is like, no, that is what is going to happen. Divorced within 6 months, too. Down-to-earth but somewhat rich guy marries girl with stars in her eyes. The wedding was insane. Like, as you walk in, there is a guy on each of the double doors opening them in unison. They actually paid 2 people to do this little dance and stand there all day. Then you walk in and see what must have been $10,000 of a giant flower arrangement in the entryway. Then another double door with 2 more guys opening them. The wedding was nuts with string quartets. No expense spared. But during the reception, I overhear the bride saying something to her friends about how he better keep working to keep her. I've seen this sort of princess mentality before. It never works out. A relationship needs each party to be equals. Divorce within a year.